All right, we're here in London today. I just gave a presentation at a producer camp out here in England, and it went really, really well. People loved it and got a lot of value from it. So I figured I'd book a studio and record it to the camera so we could post this on YouTube. So today we're gonna be talking about 10 rapid fire gems related to royalties and contracts. This is the information that determines whether you're gonna make $100,000 or $1,000 from the same placement. We see this all the time. A lot of young producers are just interested in credit, and they're not really that focused on making sure they're making as much money as possible. But what they don't realize is the difference between $100 and $500 might not be that much when you're first getting started, but eventually that's gonna be $100,000, or let's say $10,000 and $50,000. And that difference is the difference between you becoming a full-time producer or not, and just having to work another full-time job. So if this is your first time tapping into this channel, this is the best channel to learn about the business side of your career as a producer. My name is Daniel Cruz Hernandez. I am a music attorney and founder of Producer Royalty, which is the industry's leading master royalty admin. And I'm also founder of the Royalty Law Firm, which is the first music law firm that's built specifically for music producers. So we've recently taken a long gap from making content because I've been super busy, I'm not gonna lie. I'm working 100 hours a week and haven't found the time for content because the law firm, we just launched it this year and has had a ton of demand. But I really see a lot of value in making these videos and I wanna help people out. So if you like this video and you got a lot of game from it, I really encourage you to subscribe, because that's how I know that this is really touching people. So please hit subscribe and also drop a comment, and we will keep making these videos. So now presenting 10 rapid fire gems on royalties and contracts. All right, so part one, the first 6 gems are gonna be related to royalties, so how to actually collect the money. And then the second part is gonna be focused on contracts, how to actually interpret your contracts, how to use that language to your benefit, how to make sure that the fine print in your contract is gonna make you as much money as possible. All right, so gem number 1 is once you sign a co-publishing deal, your back catalog is cooked. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with co-publishing deals. If you're not, what a co-publishing deal is, it's essentially like the equivalent of a record deal for a producer. So artists, obviously most artists are focused on getting a huge record deal, and that's the epitome and peak of their career is when they sign a big record deal and they get the validation of a big company and they get put on to opportunities and get a huge bag and all the things that come with it. Well, a co-publishing deal is a very similar situation for a producer. It's a company taking a big bet on you and them giving you hopefully a lot of money up front, and then taking some ownership in your work at the same time. For most producers, it's the biggest bag they'll ever get. And if you're not familiar, we have a lot of content on the channel that relates to publishing. We're not gonna get fully into it today, but what a publisher is a company that specializes in collecting your publishing royalties. So an admin deal is when a company doesn't take ownership in your catalog, they just take a small percentage, hopefully a small percentage, and they collect the royalties that you're owed from your publishing. A co-publishing deal is a step further from that. They're not usually just collecting your royalties. They actually take ownership in your work, and then they will give you a big advance as well. And a lot of co-publishing deals will include the publisher actually giving the producer opportunities. And obviously the producer gets to say they're signed to Warner Chappell, who's the biggest publisher, or Sony ATV, or whoever they're working with. That's a little bit about co-publishing deals. Like I said, once you sign a co-publishing deal, your back catalog is cooked. So what do I mean by back catalog? So when people sign a co-publishing deal, they're focused on how long the deal is. In a co-publishing deal, a lot of times it will say that you are signing a 3-year term. It might say 2 years, it might say 3 years, could say 5 years. It's usually not longer than that. And most producers will just focus on that, whatever number is the first number they see in years. But what they don't realize is, for one, for that term to even be relevant, your deal has to recoup. So when you get a co-publishing deal, they're giving you a lot of money up front, and that money has to recoup before you can get out of that deal. Then once your deal is up, it doesn't just end there. There's what's called a retention period. And that retention period activates after the term ends. So if it's 3 years, and let's say you recouped as well, then you give notice to the publisher, then the term will ideally end at the end of whatever the current cycle is. And then what kicks in is what's called a retention period. And that retention period allows a publisher to keep collecting the royalties for whatever songs they controlled during the term of the deal. So let's say it's a 3-year deal, you terminate all the songs that were released during that 3-year deal and previous to that 3-year deal, assuming that whatever was previous enters the new deal, they'll keep collecting on for whatever the retention period is. So this is what happens for a lot of our clients. They get a big hit and they get some huge publishing deal offers, maybe 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 sometimes. They get that money up front. What they don't realize is after that deal ends, they can't just enter another deal with those songs, because a retention period for a co-pub deal is usually between 5 to 15 years. So that means all of the songs that they made during that term, which for most producers, you know, they have a very small window where they're very successful. All of the songs released during that term term are going to be included in the retention period for many years after that. Whereas in an admin deal, the retention period is usually only 1 to 2 years. So if you sign a co-publishing deal at any point, it might be the peak of your career. You might be really excited, but if you look on producer culture or look on our page, you'll see a ton of videos of big producers talking about how they signed a big co-publishing deal and it was one of the worst decisions that they made because their catalog got locked up and they weren't able to get more publishing royalties until after they got out that deal. And essentially, when you take a big co-publishing deal, what you're doing is betting against yourself in a way. Now, there's definitely some of our clients that taking a bit of money up front, like we have a lot of clients that are in South America and they work with a lot of people in the States, and getting a $20,000, $100,000 advance could really be life-changing for them because that allows them to come to the States, make more music, get in the right rooms and all the things like that. But for a lot of guys, it's also the worst decision they ever made because now they've locked up their publishing catalog for a long time. And as a producer, your publishing catalog is how you're going to be able to build a life around your music because it's what allows you to get consistent revenue over time. And when you take a co-publishing deal, you're going to reduce that significantly. So I'm not saying co-publishing deals are bad, but just know that it's probably going to be locked up and you're going to have to build a whole new catalog if you ever want to get another deal like that. And gem number 2 is, like I said, a lot of producers need that money up front. And what they don't understand is there are better ways to get advances than co-pub deals. There's a lot of companies out there, or at least a lot of means out there for getting money for your catalog that doesn't require you to give up any ownership or give up the rights to collect the money for a long period of time. There are royalty financing companies like Sound Royalties that will see how much money your catalog has generated over the last period of years. So let's say you made $10,000 the last year. They'll see that and they'll give you an advance on that money that will max out at a certain amount. So they're not able to make more than, let's say, 20% or whatever the math is on your royalty streams. So if you're looking for an advance and you have a decent amount of money coming in, you could reach out to Sound Royalties, or there's other companies out there as well. And it could be a much better situation than giving up ownership in your catalog through a co-pub deal. Then this comes as a big surprise for a lot of producers as well. I'm sure most of you guys are with BMI or ASCAP or maybe PRS. Well, did you know that they could give you advances too? To get an advance with BMI, you only need about $5,000 or so every quarter, maybe every half, for a consistent period of time. And a lot of times they're willing to advance you that money up front. So they might give you 2 years worth of royalties now. And with those deals, they're not taking any commission on it. It's basically them just doing a service to the writer community. So if you're in a crunch and you just need 10 to 20 to 50, maybe $100,000 and you have the royalties to back it up, then you might want to just get an advance from your PRO. Then also there's a lot of publishing admin companies too that are able to give advances. Like if you're a producer that has some motion and if you're looking for a flexible deal that you could exit out of that comes with a small advance, if you ask around enough, you'll probably be able to find a publisher that will give you an admin deal with a bit of an advance, maybe $10,000 to $30,000, and could be as high as $300,000 or more if you have the right catalog. So just know there's other ways to get a lot of money up front than having to enter a co-pub deal. Now, gem number 3 is the industry runs on middlemen. Every company in music is built off of referrals, and the people who refer people will often get a percentage for making that referral. And you probably already know that, but what you have to keep in mind is whenever you sign a deal to a publishing company, you have to know who's actually collecting the money and who has their hands in your pocket. If a manager introduces you to a publishing company, there's a very high likelihood that they will get a percentage of that. So what you have to think about is, do I have to go through this manager to work with this publisher or to work with any publisher at all? And maybe it's okay with you that the manager gets a percentage, but where it becomes an issue is with sub-publishers. So what a sub-publisher is, it's when a company forms a relationship with a publisher that will actually do the work to collect the money. And you have to understand that the more people there are in between you and your money, the less you're probably going to see in your pocket. Now, that's definitely not always the case. There's a lot of relationships that don't really affect the client much. For instance, with my company, if somebody refers us somebody, we usually give them a percentage of that money that we make from them. And that percentage usually doesn't influence how much the client actually receives. So if we were going to give the client an 80-20 deal, then we'll probably still give them the 80-20 deal in most situations. But in the publishing industry, there's what's called sub-publishers. And you have to understand what sub-publishers are whenever you enter a publishing relationship with anybody. What a sub-publisher is companies will form relationships with other publishers who will actually handle the registration either globally or maybe in specific territories. So for instance, if you're working with a publisher that's based in the United States, they might have a really firm grasp on how to effectively collect all of your publishing royalties that are generated in the United States, but they might not understand how to collect royalties in the Ukraine. So what they'll do is they'll form a partnership with a publisher that's based in the Ukraine and they specialize in those royalties, and they'll have that company collect the royalties for them. And that company will take a percentage, then give the other company what's left. So let's say the song makes $100,000 in the Ukraine. Then the sub-publisher takes 25% because that's their deal with the publisher based in the United States. That will leave you then with 75,000. Then your publisher will take another percentage on top of what's left. So if you have a 20% deal, I probably should have used easier numbers. They're taking 20% of whatever's left of the 75,000. So you might see a deal that will say 90-10. There's a lot of, small independent publishers that will give you a 90-10 deal. But what you don't see in the contract is these sub-publishing relationships. So what a lot of lawyers do and what we always do is ensure there's a cap on what sub-publishers can take. So we'll put a cap as sub-publishers can't take more than 20% of the royalties before it gets to the publisher, before the publisher then takes their cut. So this protects you in the event that there's a bunch of sub-publishing relationships. And the same thing applies with any other company that you're being referred to. Let's say catalog sales is a huge thing in catalog sales. If somebody's reaching out to you that doesn't actually have the money themselves to buy your catalog and they connect you with the person that does, they're obviously taking a lot of money out of your own pocket for making that referral. So if you feel like you can get in touch with the company that you want to work with without going through somebody, you're probably going to make a lot more money from that. Usually what I say is if a producer reaches out to me with a publishing deal that from a company that I've never heard of before, I usually tell them that there's probably not much of a reason to sign to this independent publisher because for one, they're going to have sub-publishing relationships. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with sub-publishing relationships, but there's not that much transparency into what's going on behind that. So you might be better off just reaching out to whoever that relationship is with, which a lot of times it might be Cobalt or maybe sometimes Sony ATV or Empire, and just trying to get a deal directly with them. That way you could prevent having the middleman in the situation. So that brings me to gem number 4, which is not all percentages are equal. So like I was saying with sub-publishers, you might see 90-10 on paper, but it doesn't mean that you're actually going to keep 90% of the royalties that come in. But also, a lot of publishers just don't do a good job collecting the money. Publishing is really intricate. There's money all over the world for you, and a lot of different collection societies are collecting it. And a publisher has to register you with a lot or most of them or all of them potentially to collect all of the money that you're owed. And it could be a really time-consuming process. Or they might just not be familiar with how to actually do it. Or they're just focused on collecting the money for their bigger clients and not as focused on working with the smaller clients. So 2 contracts could say the exact same thing, but it does not mean at all that you're going to make the exact same money from them. So the reality is you might make a lot more money when you sign to a really reputable, big, competent publisher that might take 25% instead of 15%. You could make a lot more money from that deal than you would get signing to a publisher that doesn't know what they're doing, that even signs you at 5%. And that brings me to the next gem, which is number 5, which is to stay on top of your publisher. When it comes to publishing, a lot of times the top 20% of the clients will bring in 80% of the revenue. So if you're a publisher, naturally, you're just going to focus on the catalogs that actually bring you in a lot of money because it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of following up on things that don't really make you that money. So let's say you have a song in conflict where an artist says they own 100% of the beat for whatever reason. The publisher has to then go on the email thread and negotiate or at least try to figure out what's going on and solve that issue for you. And that's a lot of money for you. I mean, you might get an extra $8,000 in your pocket. That could be life-changing or at least allow you to do a lot more. But for the publisher, if they're only getting 10 to 20%, that leaves them with only $1,000 or $2,000. And they have employees, they have overhead, and they might spend 20 hours trying to resolve that conflict. So it's really not worth it for them to actually do that. So this is why it's really important to stay on top of your publisher because the writers that get the most money from their publishing are oftentimes the ones that actually, 1, understand how publishing works and they're able to identify when things aren't registered properly. And for 2, they actually stay top of mind for their publisher. They're actually checking in with somebody at the publishing company and making sure that the registrations are right. They see that an issue takes place. They say, hey, I noticed this. Could you please help me fix this? And, they stay top of mind. Maybe they're best friends with their publishing A&R, or maybe they're just really annoying to them. Whatever it is, you have to be sure that you're on top of your publisher. Otherwise, there's a great chance, unless you're making $1 million from that song or a good amount of money from that song, there's a great chance that they don't actually prioritize collecting that money. This takes me to gem number 6, which is don't forget about the master royalties. So far, in the first 5 gems, all we talked about is publishing because that's where the majority of producers' money comes from because they'll have 50% publishing, maybe 25% publishing on a big song. And publishing royalties are confusing, but in a lot of ways, it's actually a lot simpler to understand because every song will generate publishing for a producer. And that's not really the same thing for master royalties. So like I was telling you, producer royalty is a master royalty admin. So what we do is we specialize in collecting those master royalties. royalties. And unlike publishing, if you get a song with a major artist, you usually don't start getting master royalties right away. You're not owed them. And why is that? Because you get an advance. The artist will give you an advance. And what that advance is, when the artist gives you an advance, is them giving you a bunch of master royalties up front. And you're not gonna get more master royalties until that advance recoups. A lot of our guys are making a ton of money. They're making at least 6 figures. Some of them are making close to $1 million a year. And they're chilling off their publishing. But they don't realize that they're owed another 100,000, another 200,000, 300,000 in master royalties because they're so focused on their publishing. And this is the key thing. Most songs never recoup. We usually say about 1 to 5% of major label songs recoup, which means only 1 to 5% of songs that are Billboard or charting or whatever it is will ever see master royalties go to the producers. And those master royalties don't get paid to you immediately. You have to go through a complicated, complex process to get those accounts set up with the labels. So that's what we do for producers, is we basically harass the labels until they pay our clients the master royalties that they're owed. When you're working with independent artists, master royalty collection is actually not as complicated as working with the labels. As long as you understand that master royalties are what's generated whenever the master is monetized, right? So with independent artists, what they're doing is they're putting their song on platforms like DistroKid, and pretty much all the money that that master generates gets generated from DistroKid. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have used DistroKid and you've used the split function, or you've at least heard of the split function, where when you upload the song, you can choose who else gets paid from that song whenever money gets made. So you can negotiate with the artist, you'll get a 20% master royalty, and the way you collect that is to have the artist register your split when they upload the song, which is not that hard of a process at all. But a lot of producers don't know that's how you get paid your master royalties. So my advice to you is just know about master royalties, know how they work, know how they get collected. And if you want to learn more about master royalties, there's other videos on this channel that breaks them down. And before we move on to the contracts, I just want to kill a couple myths. Master royalties are not mechanical royalties. That's a very common misconception. They're not the same thing. Mechanical royalties are a type of publishing royalty. Sound Exchange only collects a very small portion of your master royalties, and publishers do not collect your master royalties at all. And one thing I like to mention is if you use BeatStars, for whatever reason, their agreements do not include master royalty splits. So I advise, if you do use BeatStars, to write into your agreements that you will get a master royalty of somewhere between 10 to 25, sometimes 50%, and that could be a real game changer for you. Even though most artists won't actually register your master royalties, at least you'll be entitled to them if the song does blow up. All right, so that was part 1. That was focused on royalties. Now we're gonna move on to part 2, which is focused on your contracts. So gem number 7 is know what actually makes you money in your producer contracts. When it comes to specifically producer agreements, which is not to be confused with production agreements, which a production agreement is when you sign to somebody. So if you sign to another producer, another artist, or to a label, they're often called production agreements. Producer agreements is when you are giving the rights to your beat to an artist. And when it comes to producer agreements, there's a lot of things in there. They could be very long, but these are the few things that actually make a difference for the most part in most situations to how much money you'll actually make. First, obviously, if you get a higher advance, that means you'll get more money in your pocket. Second is obviously also your higher royalty percentage. So that might not always be relevant because, like I said, if you get a big advance, then you might never get a royalty percentage, but you want to see a higher royalty percentage where possible. Then third is whether the advance is 50% or 100% recoupable, or maybe non-recoupable. And what that means is, let's say you get $1,000 advance and it's only 50% recoupable, then that means only $500 has to recoup before you start getting master royalties. And if it's non-recoupable, that usually means that the advance doesn't have to recoup before you start getting master royalties. But usually the song does have to recoup, but your advance doesn't have to recoup. The next thing is album level versus master level recoupment. What album level recoupment is, it means that you won't get master royalties until the entire project or the entire album or EP, whatever it is, whatever album is defined as, recoups. Whereas master level recoupment, it means that you'll start getting master royalties after the master recoups, after whatever your producer agreement defines as the master, which is usually just the songs that you worked on. Then the next thing is sample reductions and how those are treated in the contract, because we have a lot of clients who use samples and they'll be huge songs, but what their lawyer did not do was ensure that those costs of the samples were taken out of the artist share, or at least like the total share, and not out of just the producer share. And that really screws over a lot of our contracts, and they'll have a negative balance of $500 and something thousand because every period their master royalties they're owed are actually being decreased, because let's say they had a 3% master royalty and the sample takes 4%, it's coming out of their share. Then the next thing a lot of producers don't know is you can get legal fees added on top of whatever you get as an advance. So when you're negotiating, let's say you're a loop maker, we use this a lot with loop makers especially, you might not feel like you have leverage to ask for more than the producer that actually got the placement. You can ask for your legal legal fees to be added on top. So that way you're not paying your lawyer out of, let's say, your $1,000 share, you're paying them $500. You could get your legal fees added on top. And then last thing is Sound Exchange letter of direction. So not going to get into it now. There's a full video on Sound Exchange, but Sound Exchange collects master royalties from internet radio. So from like Pandora, Sirius XM, iHeartRadio, and those things. You want to be sure that you have a Sound Exchange letter of direction at the end of your producer agreement. So gem number 8 is a short contract does not mean a good or a better contract. A lot of people are intimidated by long contracts, but what they don't realize is most of the things in the contract are actually there to benefit you, and they're long for a reason. The shorter contracts are often the ones that you want to be more wary of. So for instance, there's what's called a producer declaration. And what a producer declaration is when the label is getting the rights from the producer to release the song before getting a full agreement signed. And for the most part, there's not really any reason to sign a producer declaration. And a lot of times the declaration will say right up top, it'll call it a producer declaration. And if you see that, you probably shouldn't sign it ever, because what you could do instead is just ask them to send over the long form agreement, which is the full producer agreement. And in there, you'll have all your typical rights and protections. Whereas with the producer declaration, a lot of times all that it says is you give the label the right to release the music before you actually get paid or full terms are agreed to. And then at that point, you lose all your leverage when you sign that because the label already has the rights that they need. Then gem number 9 is if you sign to an artist or producer, you're gonna lose a lot of control and lose at least half of your money most of the time. So how that works is, like I was saying, a production deal is when you sign to an artist or producer, maybe a label, and those deals are structured where whoever you sign to, the company will receive 50% of whatever advance you get. Maybe it could be more, maybe it could be less. And there'll also be a co-publishing deal attached to that production deal. So basically you're giving up 50% of your publishing and a lot of times 50% of whatever you make on the master. But even more importantly than that for a lot of people is you're giving up the right in a lot of situations to actually collect your money. And what I see a lot of big producers doing is as soon as they get some traction is they want to start signing producers. And what they do is they talk to their lawyer and their lawyer gives them a contract and doesn't actually fully explain what that contract says. So they're giving basically the producer the contractual right to do things that they don't actually know how to do. So you'll enter a co-publishing deal with somebody who doesn't know how to actually collect your money. And we've seen this screw over a ton of producers. So you just want to be aware of, like, if you enter a production deal, for the most part, you're gonna lose control of actually collecting the money that you're owed. And that brings me to the last gem, which is a bad contract doesn't necessarily mean that somebody wants to fuck you over. In this industry, ignorance creates bad terms more than harmful intentions do sometimes. A lot of people have great intentions, but they just don't actually know how to fulfill their promises, or they don't even know they're making promises to people. So like with production deals, you might enter a co-publishing deal with somebody and they just don't know how to actually collect your money and to handle the accounting that goes into running a publishing company. And the same thing applies to management deals. My law firm gets a lot of deals from managers that I could tell very clearly they were drafted with ChatGPT or they were just pulled from the internet, and they're terrible deals. But I don't necessarily assume that that manager has bad intentions because they just pulled a contract from the internet. So I know I talked a lot about what to look out for in contracts and things to be careful with, but last thing I wanted to close on is just know that if you do get a bad contract, like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person that you're signing to is bad and they actually want to harm you. All right, so that was 10 gems related to royalties and contracts as a producer. I hope you got some game from this. Like I said, this was a presentation I gave in London and people got a lot of game from it. So I hope you did as well too. If you like this video, please drop a comment and share this with a friend. This is the information that will change a lot of producers' careers. So thank you for tapping in, and yeah, check out some of the other videos on the channel.